What is going on, everybody? Welcome back, Offsetting Penalties Podcast. We're here, another pod. No NFL this week, but there's UFC Paramount Era begun last week, UFC 324. Great main event. Rest of the card was okay. And then the UFC did what they never do, and they went back-to-back weeks with numbered cards. No more pay-per-views, numbered cards now. And we've got a great one this week. Pretty top-heavy. Australia cards aren't always the greatest. There's always some issues with fighters going over there because they tax so severe, and a lot of times, you can put Aussies on the card, but you need someone to fight the Aussies, and a lot of times people aren't willing to make that long of a flight just to have half their paycheck taken, unless it's for a championship bout or like a serious jump in the rankings, which there's a couple of those on this card. So really, really fun card. And let's jump right into it. Before we do, subscribe to the YouTube, follow on Spotify, check out Instagram, TikTok. Offsetting Penalties is everywhere right now. I'm trying my best. I'm a college student, so if there's little stretches of periods where there's not podcasts coming out or reels coming out or whatever, just understand, bear with me. I've got other responsibilities. I got to keep good grades. I got to, sustain a life down here in Southern California, but it's great, and this podcast has gotten a lot of love, and I appreciate everyone listening, everyone watching, everyone tuning in. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Main event, rematch. My favorite fighter in the UFC, Alexander Volkanovski, is rematching against Diego Lopes. This is a title fight about 9 or 10 months ago, last April, on the Miami card. It was an unbelievable fight. Volk got back in the win column, and he was on a pretty bad losing skid there with the Ilya knockout, the Islam knockout. It was a rough period of time for Volkanovski. Ilya moves up. Obviously, they gave Volk the shot to go fight for the vacant title because he's one of the best champions that this division has ever seen, if not the best. And they give him Diego Lopes. It was a fight that made a lot of sense at the time. It was a really fun fight. Both guys had their moments, but it ended up being Volkanovski who controlled most of that fight. Just really, really good boxing. He mixed in the wrestling. He didn't have a ton of success with it, especially later in the fight, but just to keep Diego off balance a little bit. His jab was absolutely money, and he just capitalized on an issue that Diego Lopes has had throughout his career, which is just an inability to, circle, like movement from these Grasso gym guys like Diego Lopes, Alexa Grasso. Like a big knock on these fighters have been the movement, right? Alexa Grasso showed that against Natalia Silva, and Diego Lopes showed that against Volk in his last fight, that like these guys always have a tough time getting off the fence, always have a tough time circling, and also the head movement. But Diego Lopes bounced back from that and had one of maybe the fight of the year against John Silva, who obviously just fought a week ago at UFC 324. And it was an unbelievable fight in which Diego Lopes, showed his grappling is elite. And, this is something people forget about Diego Lopes a lot because, he's got such dynamite in his hands, and he loves throwing, and he loves banging and swinging, that, he's an unbelievable jiu-jitsu practitioner. And what ended up happening was he caught John Silva doing some spinny, chaotic stuff like John Silva does, and just mauled him, did a ton of 12-6 elbows from mount, was threatening submissions, and give John Silva credit. He weathered the storm, came back in round 2 after taking a lot of damage, and was really putting it on Diego Lopes. And when it felt like the momentum was shifting and John Silva was going to take over and find a finish, Diego Lopes pulled out the spinning elbow of spinning elbows along the fence with the fence to his back and put out John Silva. And it was an unbelievable knockout, but really what it showed people is how good Diego Lopes' chin is, because he was eating shots from John Silva. And in this Volkanovski fight, he was eating shots as well and was never phased, never out of the fight. Yeah, he gets stunned from time to time, and especially being a brawler like he is, he's willing to trade and get hit to hit you. But he really showed that his chin is on another level, and we all know about the dynamite in his hands, and we all know about the jiu-jitsu skills that he possesses. So this is a championship caliber fighter in Diego Lopes. And a lot of people, you would think after a pretty decisive victory by Volkanovski in the first fight that the odds wouldn't be this close, but they are, man. They really are. And you see why. In round 2 of that fight, in these guys' first fight, Volkanovski got dropped, and it was a tendency that Volk has had and gotten caught doing multiple times in the last couple of years, which is simply, when someone's throwing a combination at him, he loves backing up with the chin in the air. And if you catch him along the fence, or if you extend your combo a little bit, you're able to catch him. And that's what Diego Lopez did. Diego Lopez was jabbing the whole night, and Volkanovski was defending, backing up, moving out of the way. But then when Diego followed it with an overhand, he caught Volk and knocked Volk down, right? It could have been a KO. Now, credit to Volk. It was the end of the round. Credit to Volk. He, in his corner, he got back in it. He ended up controlling the rest of the fight. But this was a very even fight, right? And Volkanovski decisively won, being 4-1, maybe 3-2. Some people had it. But it was a fight in which Diego Lopez had many, many moments. And what we've seen from Diego Lopez since that fight is he's fought once, he's made adjustments. I've seen the training videos of him. He's moving his head a lot more. You could tell that is a point of emphasis with his coaches, with his gym, which is a big reason Volkanovski was able to catch him, was throwing these combos, and Lopez was just not moving his head off the center line. And another thing is, and I heard this a lot after the Volkanovski fight, the first one with Diego Lopez, was he was afraid to grapple with Volk. Volk was shooting these takedowns on him, and it was making Diego hesitate and stuff. And Diego, after the fight, said, I have elite jiu-jitsu. I don't need to be scared of this guy's grappling. So it makes for an interesting fight, right? Rematches are always weird. A lot of times in recent memory, we've seen rematches go the way of the person who won the first one. The one that comes to mind the most to me is Strickland DDP. That was on the Sydney, Australia card a year ago. But then Petr Yan Merab, we saw how that turned out, and Petr Yan put together the fight of a lifetime and took the belt back. So it makes for a fascinating fight. I understood why people were a little frustrated that this fight got booked, just simply because, look, there were other featherweight contenders. If there was no one else, you'd understand it. But, a lot of people, including myself, thought Lerone Murphy should have been the guy to get the title shot. He didn't end up getting it. There are some people who are on the Movsar Evloev boat. Me personally, no. You got to fight more than once every 2 years. You can't pull out of fights. You can't. Also, he doesn't have any finishes in the UFC. I do think that matters to the UFC brass. So I understood why they went Diego. I would have gone Lerone Murphy personally, but Diego Lopez, Alexander Volkanovski, the first fight delivered. There's no reason to think the second one won't. So Diego, it's clear he's made some adjustments since that first fight. The head off the center line, a lot of the grappling, there's no fear of going to the ground with Volkanovski, because Volk is not a submission threat. He's a ground and pound threat. He's a wrestling threat, but he isn't a guy who's got these world-class chokes and everything. That's what Diego Lopez does have. So it makes for an interesting grappling element to this fight if it goes to the ground. A very classic wrestler with ground and pound versus guy with really, really elite jiu-jitsu. It always makes things a little interesting there. I'm saying all this to kind of put in people's heads who don't think this is going to be a close fight and think Volk's going to do the same thing, that it won't. Diego Lopez is a smart, intelligent fighter. He's a guy who coaches a lot of his teammates. He coached on The Ultimate Fighter. Like, it's clear that there's a lot of fight IQ with this guy, and you'd be stupid to think he's going to come into this fight with the same game plan, the same tendencies he did the first one. But on the flip side, Alexander Volkanovski, what he didn't have in that fight, and people love Volk everywhere, what he didn't have in that fight was serious home turf advantage. He just didn't. And that was big. That was big for Volk in that Perth fight against Islam, in which there were moments where Volk was losing. The crowd really seemed to rally behind him and made that first fight against Islam so close. You're in Sydney for this one. The people are going to show up for Volkanovski. He's the best Australian fighter probably of all time. He's one of the most iconic Australian fighters of all time. So there's going to be a serious home turf advantage. There's also the factor with these Australia cards that people don't always think about. The card is the same time it normally would be for us on U.S. time. It's going to be a 7 p.m. or 6 p.m. main card start time now with Paramount. Normally it would be 7. What that translates to in Australia is this card usually takes place in the morning, about 9 a.m. to noonish. I'm not sure the specific time or anything. So it always makes for an interesting thing in terms of the weigh-ins, right? The fighters get an extra 12 or so hours to hydrate after the weight cut. And you'd think for a guy older into his career, having fought in lightweight a couple times, that does favor Volk a little bit. We've seen Volk is not like some skinny dude outside the camp. Like Volk, we saw with the Islam fight, I'm not trying to call Volk fat. He's my favorite fighter in the entire world. But like Volk is a guy who does have to go through some long camps and, the weight cuts. He's done it before, but like we've seen how the weight cut can factor in when he got KO'd by Islam and such. him having those extra hours to rehydrate, the fact that this fight got booked quite a while ago now, or it's been rumored for a while, and folks probably known they were saving him for the Sydney card for a while, it does make for a little bit of an advantage for Alexander Volkanovski. And the other thing about Volk is he is an unbelievably smart fighter too. That's part of the reason I love him so much is the fight IQ is there, the camp he has, they make adjustments too. And it's going to be interesting to see. It's always that cat and mouse game. Diego Lopez is going to come in with adjustments. Is Volk going to come in with adjustments, or are those adjustments that him and his team are going to have to make amidst the chaos mid-fight? I don't know, and that's what makes this fight fascinating. So I get it. Was it the rightful person to fight for the featherweight belt? Maybe not, but it's what's booked, and it's a really fun fight. The first fight was really, really even. I am, and it breaks my heart to say this, Alexander Volkanovski, my favorite fighter in the UFC, and I will be sobbing if he loses on Saturday, but I do lean Diego a little bit in this one. It was my logic for picking Gaethje, or for picking Patty last week, and I was wrong in that pick, but I'll say it again. When guys are older, the amount of time you take in between fights factors in a little more to the younger guys, right? And Volkanovski hasn't fought since he fought Diego in April. Diego has fought. Diego had a fight on the in-between in September at Noche UFC. So you would think the extended time off for Volk, considering, he took damage in the Diego fight, but it wasn't like an absurd amount of, it wasn't like a war or anything. It was kind of a war. It was a really good fight. But like you would imagine that having 10 months off, 9 months off for an older guy, the chin doesn't get any better, right? All these things, it worries me a little bit. And I think that the thing about Volkanovski, as good of a fighter as he is, that tendency of backing up with his head to the fence has been such an issue throughout his career. And I just I worry a little bit, dude. So, I'm leaning Diego here because I just think the power that Diego possesses and the not searching for the kill shot this time around, not looking to just put Volk out with one shot, right? Even though Volk's chin is very, very scary and he loves keeping it in the air as he's backing up to the fence, Diego, if he can really put a little more volume on Volk in this fight and then not be afraid to go to the ground where he has world-class jiu-jitsu, I do think it favors Diego a little bit. So I lean Diego, but the odds say it, I say it, it's a close fight. You could easily see Volkanovski coming in with the same game plan, but physically, age-wise, Diego has the advantages. The extra time to rehydrate, you would imagine favors Volk, but that's something Diego will surely be able to take advantage of. I just think this, to me, feels like it could be the end for Volkanovski. I really hope it's not. I really hope we get another defense or two out of Volk, but he looked so good in that first fight, but there were moments that Diego Lopez could capitalize on, and you would think being a younger fighter, Diego Lopez's career is still on an ascension. I don't know what Volk's is, and is Diego going to be able to make the improvements in between the first fight and this one? I think so. Is Volk going to be able to make a bunch of improvements? I don't know. He's up there in age. So I do lean Diego in this one, but unbelievably close fight, unbelievably fun fight. I'm going to be on the edge of my seat because I cannot emotionally handle Alexander Volkanovski getting KO'd again. I just can't do it. If he loses a decision, that's going to be painful, but I can live with it. If I see another Ilya Islam type thing, I will lose my mind. So give me Diego in this one. Close fight, fun fight. And let's move on to the co-main. Dan Hooker and Benoit Saint Denis. What a fun fight. BSD is a 3-1 favorite in this one. A little over a 3-1 favorite. Really, really fun fight. I love that Dan Hooker's getting active. There's been some inactivity due to injuries and other things for Dan Hooker. So I love that he's getting in here very shortly after the Arman loss. That was in mid to late November was the Arman loss in Qatar. And he's getting back in here already only a couple months later to fight Benoit Saint Denis. And BSD also fought pretty recently. He fought in November against Beneil Dariush, and that was an incredible fight for BSD to put him away in, 15 or 16 seconds? It's clear. MMA is the king, MMA fans are the kings of overreactions just because of the simple fact that you watch a guy lose once or, God forbid, twice in a row, and the career is over. BSD had two tough losses. The Poirier loss, I don't think many people blamed him for that. I don't think his stock was down in many people's eyes after that fight. I think he ran into a legend, and he just ran out of gas in a fight he was having a lot of success with. But the Moicano fight was a different story. That was really hard for people to stomach, especially afterwards, when BSD's next fight was against Kyle Prepelic on short notice, like it wasn't some big name opponent or anything, and Moicano would turn out to lose against Islam, which you can imagine, you can see coming. And then he would lose against Dariush, a guy that BSD, that's MMA math right there. BSD beats Dariush, Dariush beats Moicano, Moicano beats BSD, right? That's why you can never do the MMA math game. But he had 2 losses. The second one was especially bad, and a lot of people were out on BSD. They were out on him. And now he's rallied back in the win column. He beat Prepelic. That was a good win. It was expected, whatever. Then he beats Mauricio Rufy. Unbelievable performance to take out a guy who we're going to talk about in the next fight, who had a ton of hype on him, a ton of momentum on him. And then he knocks out Beneil Dariush within 16 seconds. So this guy who lost 2 in a row and everyone was counting him out, all of a sudden he's here and he's active. He beat Rufy in September. He beat Beneil Dariush in November, and now he's fighting in January/February, because the card will be February 1st in Australia. But he's fighting against Dan Hooker not too long later. So he's being active, and it's clear that this guy is entering the prime of his career. And this was a guy, and I felt like such a dummy when I said this take, but back in the day when Dustin Poirier, who was also my other favorite fighter until he retired, Volk and Dustin Poirier were my 2 favorite fighters in the UFC. When he fought Dustin Poirier, after the fight, I remember texting my friends, and I said, I still believe BSD is a future champ. He just ran into Dustin, or something along those lines. And what ends up happening is he loses to Moicano, and I'm like, oh my God, did I really call this guy a future champ? And he just got beat up. It was like a 10-7 round against Moicano. And guess what happens? He wins 3 in a row. He switched coaches. He actually has like a proper gym and a proper camp now, and he just has all this momentum on him. I'm not talking about Dan Hooker a bunch here, just because I think this is BSD by a landslide. Dan Hooker, unbelievably fun fighter. The grappling has been an issue for him. Arman was able to have his way with Dan Hooker, no problem. And Arman was still tagging him on the feet. Dan Hooker never felt like he really found his rhythm in that fight. Now, what's going to cater to his style a little bit more is Benoit Saint-Denis fights like a marauder. He's one of those guys that throws safety out the window. He puts himself in harm's way. But what he does is he grapples you. He's not afraid to grapple you. He will put pressure on you. He will put you against the fence. He will make you work, because Benoit Saint-Denis just got a nonstop motor. And for Dan Hooker, that's not a good thing. So if BSD comes out and starts brawling and doesn't shoot the takedowns, you give Dan Hooker a shot, because Dan Hooker's been in these wars. He's had success in these wars. I just don't know if that happens in this one. I think Benoit Saint-Denis is by far the more powerful fighter, by far the more athletic fighter. He's younger, and not to mention he's got the grappling advantage by a landslide. So I'm not trying to make this a anti-Dan Hooker agenda here. I'm just saying that BSD is that dude, I think. And I think he always has been, and he just had 2 losses in a row in which he was switching camps and stuff. And I think people are going to see this fight. I think people are going to look at BSD. I think he's going to get another statement win. And then people are going to go, man, he's like a title shot away from the belt, which is wild to think that Ilya BSD is a possibility, especially with those 2 guys being from Europe. That would be an amazing headliner for a Europe card if they did a Europe pay-per-view at some point, or number card, excuse me. But, Dan Hooker's a great fighter. He's tough. He's gritty. He's got really, really good teep kicks up the middle. He's got good boxing. But I just think BSD, this is such an advantage in so many aspects of the game. BSD, he's got the grappling advantage, the athleticism advantage, the age advantage. That's just what I think. So I think BSD gets it done in this one, but unbelievably fun fight. This is great matchmaking, great co-main if you're not going to have some title fight or number 1 contender fight, 2 guys who are going to go in there and go to war. And to be fair, that caters to Dan Hooker style. Arman Tsarukyan's not a guy who goes to war. Arman kind of starches a lot of the people he faces. BSD will go to war. So that gives Dan Hooker hope. I think the odds are reflective. Dan Hooker is much less of an underdog in this one than he was against Arman Tsarukyan a couple months ago. That is justified, just because BSD will put himself in harm's way more than Arman will. But I still think BSD has so many advantages in this one. It's hard to pick against them, frankly. It's hard to pick against them. So I mentioned it a little earlier. BSD's 2 wins ago was a statement finish over Mauricio Rufy. Rufy is back for the first time since then, taking on Rafael Fiziev. Interesting fight. A lot of people were frustrated that Rufy was getting a jump in the rankings after losing. At the time he was number 15, and he lost to BSD, who at the time was like 13 or so. Now he gets to fight number 9 in the world, Rafael Fiziev, who's a very, very good fighter in his own right. This matchup caters to both these guys so well because it's going to be one on the feet. These are two guys who, have interesting takedowns, right? Like Mauricio Ruffi has the cool scissors takedown, and Rafael Fiziev's engaged in some grappling with Justin Gaethje and everything. But these are two guys who, especially Fiziev, are world-class strikers. And it's going to make for a fun fight in which we're going to see some really, really good striking and not just throwing down and trading in the middle of the octagon. I mean, really pristine striking. Mauricio Ruffi has really, really good long boxing plus really explosive knees and everything. Fiziev's kicks are just a nightmare to deal with. He just blasts body kicks. He throws head kicks. He throws leg kicks. Very much a classic Muay Thai, plodding, just chopping away style. And I think, it's hard to give a guy an advantage in this one because stylistically this favors into both their hands. So it really comes down to, Ruffi, much less experienced than Rafael Fiziev. He's been in the UFC he's had less time in the UFC is what I'm trying to say. And Rafael Fiziev has fought the who's who's. He's fought Justin Gaethje twice. He's fought Gamrot. He's coming off of a win over Bahamondes, who is another striker similar to Mauricio Ruffi in terms of the length. Now, Bahamondes is giant for lightweight. Ruffi isn't that giant for lightweight, but Ruffi is a longer striker, so Fiziev is used to this. Fiziev's a guy who was talking about potentially moving down to featherweight, right? This is a guy who potentially wanted to move down to featherweight and decided, no, I'm going to stay at lightweight. Ruffi's a guy who's long for a lightweight as it is. So the size and the reach advantages in Ruffi's favor here, and the odds are basically a pick 'em. The reason I think they slightly favor Ruffi is just because the only way we've seen him get beat was with the pressure grappling from BSD. Everyone else who's tried to strike with him has failed. But then the counter argument to that is who's struck with him. Bobby Green, James Youngtop, Jamie Malarkey, who's actually on this main card, funny enough. That is the problem here. So it makes it a fascinating fight. I do slightly, I love Ruffi, Fighting Nerds guy. He's not with the Fighting Nerds full time anymore. He's actually been in Australia training with Volk and Izzy and a lot of these guys, which I think will favor him. That's sometimes a change of scenery is so good, as we've seen for BSD. He changed scenery and then wrote the ship. I do lean Fiziev here though, and the reason is I just think the strength of schedule is all you need to look at. Is Rafael Fiziev has had striking success against some of the top names in the lightweight division. Mauricio Ruffi hasn't. Mauricio Ruffi had an unbelievable knockout over Bobby Green. Bobby Green's a guy that gets knocked out and put away a lot. He beat James Yontop. He beat Jamie Malarkey, right? He's beat he set some unbelievable performances, and you can see how evident the skill set is for Mauricio Ruffi. But Fiziev, the skill set is the same for Rafael as well. And he's a guy who is unbelievably quick, unbelievably powerful, and has had success fighting guys bigger than him over the years. He just has. Moicano was a bigger guy than him. Bahamondes was a bigger guy than him. Ruffi's going to be a bigger guy than him in this fight, and that's something that Fiziev is comfortable doing. He's an undersized lightweight. He's been doing it his entire career that he's been at lightweight. So I like Fiziev in this one ever so slightly, but it's fascinating because these Fighting Nerds, and I know Ruffi's not like a full-time fighting nerd anymore, but these Fighting Nerds, every time they've lost, they've bounced back in a really, really good way. Protez lost to Ian Gary, and people were out on Protez. And then he comes back at vicious KOs over Jeff Neal and Leon Edwards, and now he's like a win away from a title shot. John Silva got KO'd by Diego Lopez, just getting overzealous in that fight. Then he comes back and puts together a really, really good performance against Arnold Allen the other night. Kyle Baharlio, we'll see. He just lost to Imavov. Now he gets to face RDR on the next pay-per-view after this one, or the next numbered card after this one. So these Fighting Nerds, these guys, and this is the same thing. This is what I always say about MMA fans. You can't always overreact to one loss, especially when the losses aged really well. Because BSD, it's not like he's lost a fight since then. He had an unbelievable knockout over Beneil Dariush after that, and we'll see how he does against Hooker. So, it's very much a toss-up in my eyes, and I'm not saying coin flip. See, I'm not using the same cliches every podcast. I just think that Fiziev, if I were to lean one way, the strength of schedule is undeniable. It just is skill set for skill set, two different striking styles, but two really, really fun striking styles. Roofy will switch stances a lot. Like I mentioned, the long boxing, he's got really, really good knees up the middle. Fiziev, more of the typical chop you down Muay Thai style, but unbelievably explosive. That's the word most people use for Rafael Fiziev, is he's an explosive striker. And it's, when you watch one fight of his, you can't deny it, dude. You can't. He's like, the athleticism is there. So really, really fun fight, really, really even. I give my fight picks because I feel like I have to every time I break down one of these fights, but this would be the one I'm the least confident in. It's can a guy on one side bounce back after a really, really tough loss to a guy who's really, really, really good? Or can the guy who's been around, done that for a while, was booked to fight Charles Oliveira, can this guy continue to do what he's done at the UFC for a while now? Really, really fascinating fight, and I'm really excited for it. If you want parallels, though, if you want to go from polar opposite sides of the spectrum, this is the feature bout. This is the third fight on the main card. The second fight on the main card, or one of the first fights on the main card, however you want to say it, is Tai Tuivasa versus Thaleson Teixeira. Going from this fight to the striking athleticism of Fiziev and Roofy is going to be madness. It's going to be such a trip to watch those two fights back to back. This is a weird fight, man. Tai Tuivasa is a plus 275 underdog. It's been a while since he's fought. It has been a while, and it was not going good for Tai Tuivasa. He was on he is on an extensive losing streak. He was getting finished. It just didn't look right with Tai Tuivasa at all. Rosenstrike had his way with him. Tybura put him away. It was a rough stretch for Tai Tuivasa. He's taken some time off, and during that time, he got big. And I'm not saying you see him on screen. He's already a big guy. He got big. And most people were speculating he was going to be well over 300 pounds. We've seen the fight photos this week and stuff. This is an older fight photo on the screen. He looks like he's in tremendous shape. The best shape I've seen Tai Tuivasa in his career. And sometimes guys have to do that. They take extended time off. They have their fun. They drink their beer. They eat their food. And then when it's time and they feel mentally ready to get into the octagon, they come at you and they come in this training camp, with the intention of getting into the best shape of their life. And that's what Tai Tuivasa has done. So it'd be nice. He's a crowd favorite. The Aussies love him. It'd be nice to see him get into the win column here. It's going to be a nightmare. And it's going to be a nightmare because of Thaleson Teixeira, one of the tallest heavyweights, one of the tallest fighters in the UFC. Not a short, lot of fat heavyweight, kind of like Tuivasa. Teixeira is a legit, tall, athletic heavyweight. And he's a guy who is only fought twice in the UFC. He beat up Justin Tafa on the Sydney card a year ago. And then he got thrown into a main event spot against Derek Lewis. That's wild to have one win in the UFC and already be thrown in against the knockout leader all time in a main event. Unbelievable pressure, unbelievable. And it was a fight in which people had issues with the stoppage. Jason Herzog stopped it as he was getting to his feet, which almost never happens. Now, it was the debate at the time. Well, he was grabbing the fence to get to his feet. So at that point, you stop the fight if he has to do that. I was in that boat. I agreed with the stoppage. But nonetheless, to get Derek Lewis in a main event in your second UFC fight is wild. And the skills with this guy are there. He's a really, really good striker. His Muay Thai game, and especially in the clinch, is really, really good. That's how he beat up Justin Tafa. He clinched up with him, and he was just kneeing him, elbowing him. And that worries me for Tai Tuivasa, because Tai Tuivasa and Justin Tafa are two similar fighters. Now, obviously, Tuivasa's better, but they're two similar fighters in the aspect of they're shorter or they're stockier. They have a little more fat on them, and they're brawlers, right? They're going to go in there and throw haymakers and stuff. When you do that against a guy with such a reach advantage, such a height advantage, and a really good skill set, it's very, very worrisome. That's why the odds are what they are in this fight. That's why Teixeira is a 3-1 favorite in this one, even more than a 3-1 favorite. So it's a fascinating fight. And have you guys noticed every podcast, I always have one phrase that I say more that especially a lot. I've been saying that every fight on this card has been fascinating to me, apparently. But Thaleson Teixeira is so inexperienced, but we didn't really get to see we haven't seen anything from this guy. The Justin Taffa fight a year ago was such a quick KO by him, and then the Derek Lewis KO was within like a minute. So that was quick. We haven't really seen this guy have extensive cage time, We'll see. I lean Teixeira in this one for the simple fact that this is 2 straight fights. This is 3 straight fights in the UFC that he's fighting guys who are much shorter than him, power punchers who look to brawl. He had some success against Derek Lewis. He did land a punch until he got caught himself by Derek Lewis, who always does what Derek Lewis does. And Tai Tuivasa, I get he's in better shape and everything, but he just lacks skill set. The skill set isn't crazy for Tai Tuivasa. He's a brawler. He's a brawler. He goes in and he throws hands with you. He's the guy who I would want on my side in a bar fight 10 out of 10 times. In the octagon, you can have success with it, and he was like almost finishing Cyril Gane, getting a title shot at one point. But eventually, when you face these guys who are much more skilled than you, have much more weapons in their arsenal, it doesn't always work out that way. So I do lean Thaleson Teixeira in this one for that reason. Still unbelievably fun fight. It's heavyweight, so someone's probably going to sleep. Someone's probably getting finished, as we know, and it's an interesting one. And those are the 4 main card fights I wanted to talk about. The other one is Quillen Salkild versus Jamie Mullarkey. Quillen Salkild is one of the most hyped up prospects in the UFC right now, coming off of just a vicious short notice knockout over Nasrat Haqparast on that Qatar card that Arman Sarukian fought Dan Hooker on. Unbelievable performance by him. He's one of the most hyped up prospects. We saw it with Atiba Gauthier the other night. These prospects have a ton of steam on them. It feels like they always have these tough tests. I don't know if Jamie Mullarkey is that. Quillen Salkild was supposed to fight Rong Zhu in this one, who's a really, really good fighter in his own right. Jamie Mullarkey took this on short notice. Is a guy who gets beat up a lot, kind of lacks athleticism and a great skill set. So I do lean Quillen Salkild in that one, and it's reflective because he's 1,000 favorite. He's a massive favorite in that fight. But that's a fun fight to put the most hyped up Aussie prospect right now, one of the most hyped up prospects in the UFC, to open up the main card. I really do like that. The rest of the card, Junior Taffa, Billy Elikana. I don't like the Taffa bros. I just think they're not very skilled fighters. I don't know how they continue to stay in the UFC and get these fights and everything. Junior Taffa's 6-4, and he's fighting is the future prelim on a numbered card. Junior Taffa is a brawler. Elikana, or however you say his name. I've seen him fight. I watched him fight in LA a year ago. He's a good fighter. He's got some cool boxing, some cool kicks and everything, but he's kind of been in Snorefest sometimes. I don't know. It's whatever. Cam Rowson versus Cody Brundage. Cam Rowson is actually a really cool prospect for middleweight. He is massive, in terms of height and reach. He just looks like a Slenderman in there, but he's got really crisp striking. He's a city kickboxing guy, so Izzy Volk's trained there. Dan Hooker's part of that gym, of course. Jacob Malkin versus Torres Finney. If anyone knows Torres Finney, middleweight who's 5'7". He's an absolute unit, but unfortunately, all he really has going for him in his game is wrestling. Unbelievable wrestler, but it ends up being some Snorefest. Jacob Malkin isn't exactly a fireworks fighter by any means either. Jonathan Mikalev versus Oban Elliott. That's a really fun fight. This is a fight that got booked in Baku, I want to say, in Baku, Azerbaijan in June, and got canceled. Elliott had to pull out. I really hope this fight happens again this week because these are 2 really skilled fighters. I think Oban Elliott's really, really fun to watch. He's a really, really great fighter. Actually, this card was booked for the Perth card, and then Oban Elliott got out. So, they're still he made it right, and they're fighting in Australia. Really, really fun fight. Mikalev is a really, really fun prospect at welterweight. So is Oban Elliott, even though he lost his last fight. And then Con Offley versus Iazah. And then the first 4 fights of the night, I'm looking right here, are all road to the UFC. So for my people out there, John Anik will not be calling those fights. John Anik will be on the call. John Gooden, who usually calls road to the UFC, will call those first 4, and then Anik will take the reins for the rest of the pay-per-view. It's road to UFC. I'm not locked in on it or any means, but those fights always deliver. I don't know if you guys remember the Shanghai card last year. The road to UFC they had some road to UFC fights on that card, and they were wild, and there was wild knockouts. Shi Ming, the strawweight doctor, the one who told her parents she wasn't fighting, she that head kick knockout she had was a road to UFC fight. So the road to UFC finals are going to open up this card. I highly recommend, if you have the time, watching those. You don't need to know the fighters or anything. I don't know. It's just nice to watch violence. That's what we're here. That's why we're here to do. We're here to watch violence and talk about violence. And those are always fun fights that deliver. And yeah, UFC 325, Australia cards aren't always the greatest, and you can kind of see the quality drop off like pretty quickly from the top of the card to the bottom. But the Aussies bring it. Volk Lopez is a great fight. BSD Hooker's bound to be a war. And then, of course, you got fan favorites like Tai Tuivasa, Rufi, Fiziev. Really, really fun fight. Really, really fun card. And I'm excited, man. I'm excited. You know, we get back-to-back weeks. I don't know if this will ever happen again. Back-to-back weeks of numbered cards. Back-to-back weeks with belt fights, with title fights. Awesome. It's just awesome, man. It's just awesome. And I will say, you know, UFC 324 was an interim title. This is an actual title, the featherweight title. And then UFC 326, the number card after this, is going to be BMF title, Max Holloway, Charles Oliveira. That's 3 pay-per-views to start the year and only 1 actual undisputed title on the line amongst those 3, which really feels like the April, May, June cards are going to be really, really good, but especially the June White House card. I would be surprised if there wasn't at least 2 or 3 title fights on the White House card, not to mention Miami cards are always good, and whatever they do on the in-between. So very, very exciting times for the UFC. Now, of course, this is a NFL UFC podcast. I always say it, my UFC people, if you don't care about NFL, just watch the UFC pods, and vice versa, or if you like both, be here for all of them. But NFL, kind of an off week. I'm going to come at you guys with an NFL honors episode, meaning I'm going to give you guys my MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, all those different things. Kind of an end-of-year award show of who I think deserves those awards, either before or after the actual honors when we find out who gets those awards. And then, of course, next week's the Super Bowl. Obviously big. I'll be coming out with a bunch of content going into Patriots Seahawks for that one. I'm pretty excited for the Super Bowl, even though I don't love either of the teams. I don't love Seattle at all, being a Niner fan. Really, really fun Super Bowl, I think. I think it'll be better than people think. Most people think Seattle's going to kill them. I wouldn't go that far. And, you know, UFC. It's UFC season. We're off and running. So I'll be here Saturday night live. You hear me? Live on Saturday night to break down UFC 325. And I'll react to the fights. And if Alexander Volkanovski gets knocked out, you'll probably see me sipping on vodka while I'm here on the pod, because I can't handle another vote KO, guys. I can't do it. So I appreciate everyone being here. Like I say every time, if you're here to the end of the pod, you're an absolute psycho, but I love you, and I'll catch you guys later.